Hi, I'm Dr. Gwen. I'm a clinical psychologist who's been empowering disabled individuals, their families, and their support systems for over 20 years. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel, where I curate tools, share mindsets, and promote habits to help the neurodiverse community thrive. Also, hit that notification bell so that you don't miss a thing. In this episode, I interview Bruce Bloom, a vocational expert who is also a certified rehabilitation counselor and an autism specialist. Bruce sheds light on the difference between vocational and transition assessments and the necessary skills for competitive employment. Bruce proudly shares one of his accomplishments of placing more than 1,500 disabled and neurodivergent adults in the workforce. Bruce is a passionate professional who expertly understands and helps others navigate the intersection of disability and the labor market. Please enjoy this interview with Bruce. Welcome to the channel. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You know, you and I have known each other for a while. While we don't communicate that often, you were instrumental in helping shape my ideas about transition and what we need to be looking at. And you are just known as an expert in this area. So I'd love to get into, well, there's a lot we'll get into, but why don't we start with you describing who you are, telling people who you are, and what you do.
Okay. My name is Bruce Bloom. I'm the owner of Bloom Consulting. So Bloom Consulting is a company that provides vocational rehabilitation services to individuals with disabilities that want to go to work. I am let me start with the beginning of my career. It's always, I think people find it interesting on how I got into this field, because if you told me 15 years ago that I'd be a rehabilitation counselor, I would be like, what is a rehabilitation counselor? And so I started off my career, I was an HR generalist. I was an area manager for a large company. And then in my career, I had actually gotten injured and was put out of work. I had to go on workers' compensation and, that whole thing. And then I went back to school to get my master's degree in counseling. And I found rehabilitation counseling as the area that I decided to major in. And so I went to school because I had a disability, wanting to help people with disabilities find their place in the world of work. Mm-hmm. And so I got my master's in rehabilitation counseling from the University of Texas in Austin. I am a certified rehabilitation counselor, a certified vocational evaluator, a certified autism specialist. And for the last decade, I've been helping people with disabilities obtain and maintain competitive integrated employment. And so I work in a lot of different fields. I work in the schools. I work with the Social Security Administration. I work, as an expert of the court system. So I'm an expert in personal injury cases. So I work where disability hits employment, you'll find me there.
that intersection, right? The intersection of disability and employment. How I discovered you, Bruce, was in my desire to understand transition assessments. And what I mean by that are transition assessments that are usually involved in IEPs with our school systems. And someone said to me, and when I was looking for people and getting references for other people's work, because I was so curious about what the gold standard was, what was, in people's opinions, the best transition assessment they'd ever seen, right? And your name kept coming up and up and up, and you were so generous because I cold emailed you. And right away, you responded and you were like, let's talk. And it was amazing. So maybe what we can do next is, you talk about, and you do comprehensive vocational evaluations.
Yes.
And that's part of your service. You also do transition assessments for the district.
I do.
And I'm wondering, can you help us understand, me included, the difference for you between those?
Sure. So a vocational evaluation is really specific. It focuses solely on work, what type of training a person can achieve, or degree they can obtain, and complete successfully. So it's not just that they could go in this direction, but they would complete it successfully. And then what kind of jobs that a person with, whatever their abilities could do in the competitive marketplace. And so that type of assessment is used in a lot of different settings. So it's used in Social Security to determine if a person can get Social Security disability insurance, or supplemental security income. But it's also used in much more complex cases, such as either a person with multiple disabilities that's trying to go to work, or a significant disability that wants to go to work, or even in places like workers' comp or personal injury cases. And so it's very specific, though. I'm going to evaluate a person and determine, based on the information that I have, if a person can go to work, and if they can go to work, what that work would look like. And it can look like anything from, out in the full-time competitive integrated employment, which just means in the world of work, just like anybody else. It could mean part-time work, or it could mean some kind of sheltered employment, or carved out little job for a person, or even sometimes self-employment. I am trained to do supported self-employment, and that is a model that's used with more frequency. The federal government is really pushing self-employment as a model for people that are really significantly impaired and may not be able to engage in competitive work in any other setting. And so when you're talking about vocational evaluation, that's it. We're talking about work. When I evaluate a student, I consider the three main areas of IDEA. So I consider post-secondary education, I consider independent living, and I consider employment. And the reason that when I'm evaluating a student, and I consider those three areas and just do the full transition evaluation rather than just employment, is because with a student, more than any other population, you really cannot consider employment until you figure out where they're going to live, who they're going to live with, and how can they be trained, So if you have a very bright student, and that very bright student is at the top of their class, but require a significant amount of natural supports in their home environment, yep. Regardless of how bright that student is, they may not be able to go to a college campus. And so you have to look at the full person in a transition evaluation. So I would say that's the main difference. When you're considering transition, you're considering more than just the types of jobs. You're considering the environment that they can go live in, because you don't have any other data. And so the reason I do an evaluation is because I don't have a person that is 30 years old, that's lived by themselves for their whole lives. I have to figure out and determine what their adult life is going to look like, based on where we're at right now.
Yeah. And something that I bump into, Bruce, quite a bit is by the time I'm asked to do a transition assessment, sometimes it's late. It's like, oh, they're about to turn 22 and be exited from the school system. And I'm like, yeah. What? Oh, okay, that happens. Sometimes, it starts at 15, right? On that birthday or that year that they've turned 15, which that's a very different kind of trajectory there. But something that I realize, and maybe you can weigh in on this, is that by the time we're figuring out what's happening post high school, mm-hmm. either a student can do something or can't, right? Like it's so what I mean by that is the skills and the ability of that student to execute skills independently really come into play. And so I'm always trying to figure out, well, what's being prompted and how much prompting was there, or what are the supports that were there, or what are the level of accommodations? Did the student even use the accommodations? If they did, or if there's a one-on-one aid, what's the role of the one-on-one aid that's been there since the beginning all the way through high school? You want this person to go to college, maybe because that's, identified as a goal. And now I'm realizing, but you can't take notes. You haven't learned how to take notes yet, or managing your time, or getting to class, or so it's these things. And I just feel like by this time, what we need to be thinking about and the way that my mind shifts is going from, is it going to be compensatory strategies? Are we going to wrap supports around this person, right? Or are we going to rely on intervention, and how long is that going to take? And I think that's an interesting point of discussion for a team, because it's not, for me, it's not about giving up hope on learning, obviously not. But it does come where I really feel like things get really real about, can a student execute these skills that we know across the learning, living, working areas of life independently or not?
It really is, and I can only speak from my own personal experience. It's a very sad fact of the work that I do. I've often described the work I do as walking around with a big pin popping people's bubbles. And it's not because my goal is to hurt people, but really the greatest act of kindness you can give somebody at this at this point in their life, when they're transitioning from being an adolescent to an adult, is a reality check. And sometimes that reality check has to happen. And for families, there is, it is not, I don't say these things lightly. I say them because I actually have a table in my office where, before the pandemic, I called it my crying table, because I sit with parents on a regular basis, and I'm telling them things they always kind of knew, but nobody was either brave enough or because of liability purposes in the school wanted to say it. Mm-hmm. And so I've had parents, and I'm not talking about just parents that without an education they didn't understand. I'm talking about university professors in special education. I'm talking about psychologists. I'm talking about, people that are bright and educated and understand the process of IEP meetings and have educated themselves, but when they get to the point of their child's adult life, sometimes the information I'm conveying is not always what they've heard all along. They may have suspected it, and most of the time, I would say 99.5% of the time, there's that 0.5% that said, "Oh, I never even thought of it." But most people suspected it, but never got to the point of, because hope, they wanted hope. But at the time that we get to graduation, it has to be a rubber meets the road type of moment, or deciding what needs to happen to get the rubber to meet the road, right? So that's exactly, I think, what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so that you feel like you walk around with a pin. What I'll say to parents a lot of times is like, I don't mean to be a dream killer.
Right.
Like, that's not the role here. And if our goal is really ultimately the health, safety, and joyfulness of a client, right? We have to have these conversations. I almost feel like sometimes it's like a physical you never wanted to have, like because you look at everything. And I think when we get down to the actual skills, because these are all competencies, that need execution at our adult levels, and then executive functioning tasks and demands increase, right? I mean, even that idea of a student who might want to go away to college or go away to a transition program, let's just say, but they've never been away from home ever. They've never gone to summer camp. It's all of these things that we're having real conversations about. So,
and so on the other side of that, I mean, I've seen the result of when you don't have those. I guess part of why I'm so passionate about having those conversations is because I've seen the result of not having them.
Yeah.
So I've actually seen people graduate from Ivy League schools. Ivy League schools, these are bright young people, and, unfortunately, I could say young people because I'm getting to the age where everybody's younger than me,
Me too, Bruce.
Bright, Ivy League educated and not able to maintain employment because of some type of behavior that is unexpected or should have been, pointed out to, to the student, but was not, and it was never addressed. And so, and a perfect example of this is I had a man that had an MBA. He got his first job. He was bright. He went to his first job and they fired him within 3 days. He was like kicking the air and doing some odd things, that just wouldn't appear socially appropriate on a job site. Mm-hmm. And without proper disclosure of his disabilities, he didn't even realize that it was an issue. He didn't even realize it was an issue because it had never been addressed with him. And so, yeah.
And that's a big disservice.
Yeah.
That's a big disservice of even as functioning as a psychologist or a therapist myself. That reality check that you just said, like the greatest act of kindness that we can give our clients is this reality check, right?
Right.
Where I might challenge a client on something. Wow, you're always late to session. Is it because you don't want to see me? Because that's okay. We can talk about that. Or is there something else going on? It's even things like that. Or, wow, when you keep turning around in your chair, I mean, I'm not sure you want to talk about this. Is that what's happening? But there needs to be some idea of, hey, the world out there is quite social. There's a piece there. And I feel like all the things that get missed. So a lot of people focus on academics and grades.
Sure. IQ, right?
Right, IQ. But being a functioning adult in a happy, healthy, safe way, right, are really not about academics.
Dr. James Williams, my chief operating officer, if you ever hear him present, and if you haven't, you should really find some of his videos online. He is a brilliant speaker. And one of the things he talks about all the time is that issue of like not addressing social skills and he often says, yes, algebra was so important. I use algebra every single day of my life. And then he shakes his head. No, we don't use those skills every day.
Yeah.
Interacting with people, learning how to self-advocate. I mean, those are the skills that you use every day.
Yeah. Yeah. And so important. So Bruce, this kind of idea of, okay, when you do a transition assessment, you're using those three main arms of IDEA, those areas of living, learning, working.
Yes.
Amen. To evaluate the readiness or even kind of measure what someone might need to do to fill in gaps, depending on where they want to go or where they might see themselves, et cetera. Is there a specific framework that you use as you think about that? I mean, obviously apart from, IDEA, but is there anything that you bring from a mindset or a framework perspective to help you collect data, make decisions, that kind of thing?
Sure. So there are rehabilitation models that are used. Every entity has its own model. So like in Social Security, we're essentially using learned skills as a primary, benchmark of what is possible or probable, or, if the person can do, reading, math, and their reasoning level. That's how Social Security measures different jobs. And so we're comparing the person's reported abilities or previous work history, and then just figuring out, based on some rudimentary information. It's not even extremely detailed in most cases. Mm-hmm. Could a person go to work? Based on the medical evidence that's available. It's a medical model. Mm-hmm. Essentially, you're looking at, here are the medical facts. And then when I'm looking at transition, transition is really a new idea, right? Even up until the last couple of years, there wasn't even extensive education for teachers in this area, and now there's a master's in education in transition. But before, a couple of years ago, there wasn't. Yeah. And so I personally use a variety of different methodologies. There's a methodology called Rappel, which is considering the rehabilitation plan, a person's access to the the world of work, and some other factors to determine what a person's earning capacity is in the world of work. But, going beyond that, I mean, my company has placed in the last 10 years over 1,500 people in competitive integrated employment, many of which had significant disabilities, multiple disabilities, severe CP, autism, dual diagnoses, sometimes, more than that, a page of diagnoses, and figuring out what would work not only for the person, because it's really important that a person is happy in the job that they get, but what's also going to work for employers. And so I have always been, and this is just a personal bias, so I tell people this when I evaluate people, my own personal bias is that you should find real work for real money. And the reason for that is when you carve out like maybe this little job, and sometimes it's necessary. A person's disabilities are so severe that, we need to carve out and make a specific job like rolling silverware or something similar to that. However, those types of jobs, when the labor market starts to become tight or budgets become tight, those are the first positions to get eliminated. And so what ends up happening is that a person will graduate school. And again, basing it on my experience, I've seen this hundreds and hundreds of times. A person will graduate school with this little carved job, even if they were capable of more. So they were sometimes capable of, full-time competitive integrated employment, but somehow they got pushed into this little part-time job. And then the moment there's a management change, the moment, budgets become a little bit tight, they were the first positions to get eliminated. And the pandemic was a good, the beginning of the pandemic was a good way to see this. All of my people that I placed in jobs, I had one person, and at the time we had about 60 people that were placed in jobs, either just started or about to, close out our case with them. And only one person got laid off. And it was because that person did have a significant disability. And really between cognitive abilities, physical disabilities, really had a very special carved out position. But she got rehired back on when the restaurant reopened. So, it wasn't the norm. The norm for the disability community was that they were, while many people were affected by the pandemic and while many people were, put out of work because of the pandemic, the disability community was, disproportionately affected, and more people with disabilities were laid off than people without disabilities. So, we have to be really careful. And so when I'm doing and evaluating, I'm not just evaluating a person on paper, I'm not just evaluating based on my knowledge and education. I'm really relying heavily on experience, both as a person that was an HR generalist, as a person with my level of education, and as a person who has placed a lot of people in jobs. 1,500 people in 10 years is a lot of people. I mean,
Great.
Just a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing. Well, and Bruce, bringing up the idea that transition assessments are a newer kid to the block, right?
Yes.
Because they are. And what I find is that most ITPs or transition plans, individualized transition plans that I review or see are made up of these components. It's an interview to figure out your strengths, weaknesses, and preferences. Mm-hmm. It might be like a career cruising.
Sure. Maybe
some sort of career inventory. And then that's it.
Right.
And, I guess for me, what's been so challenging, and then the goals, are pretty generic, meaning so-and-so will research potential community colleges.
Right.
Right. And it's like, that could happen in one moment. We could meet that IEP goal right now, and then there's no kind of action plan to support that student. And there's maybe their self-knowledge. Like, I probably should know more about myself in order to make some decisions about the goals that I might want for my life later, or these types of things. And so that's typically what I see here anyway in California. And I know you're in Texas, but
I've evaluated students in multiple states. It's where I see that same exact pattern across the country. And it's a very sad pattern, but I've seen it in California. I've evaluated in California. I've evaluated in Texas, almost the entire state of Texas. I've evaluated in Connecticut and some other states. And and I've been asked to consult with, people in like Florida and Virginia. It's the same exact thing. It's not different. And it's the sad truth about what's happening in transition. And I think part of it is because people, without training, without understanding how to come to a good, appropriate, I like to use the word in due process hearings, appropriate goal, right? Because that's what the law says. It has to be an appropriate goal. And interest inventories don't always lead to an appropriate goal, because I can tell you, so one I guess, guiding principle of the work I do is that, informed choice. I'm going to give you information. I may give you a lot of information, and you can choose to listen to that information or go off and do whatever you want to do. That is your choice. But it is again imperative that as a student is about ready to start this transition process, or at the very end of the transition process, wherever we get to them, that we give them enough information to make a good choice. Mm-hmm. You would not tell generally, I just going to say it the way it is, you would generally not tell a student without a disability, oh yeah, it's okay. You want to play guitar for a living? Go for it. That is something that before a person goes down that road, you're going to have a very long conversation about being a starving artist, about paying your dues, about it may not happen for you. That is a normal conversation to have. And I feel like it's almost discriminatory not to have it with people with disabilities. They have the same right to that information. And the fact is that just because somebody likes to color or do a little bit of art doesn't mean they're going to make it a living at it.
I love this right to this information.
Right.
Other ways that we've also said this with some of my other guests is the dignity of risk.
Yes.
Allow someone some of their own experiences as well, right? Sure. But the right to this information. So you and I'm sure you more than me have bumped up against this, where I have a client who has a goal for themselves that is pretty atmospheric, meaning I want to become an astronaut.
Yeah.
Okay. Listen, and this is where I feel like I'm a dream killer. But how I approach that is, well, why? Like, what about it floats your boat? What do you love about that? And then can we get something that touches that? Can we find some sort of career or job that touches what you love about the idea of being an astronaut? And then is that viable? Is that a viable thing? With some of my clients, we just really break down all the steps that it would take to become an astronaut. And then I'm giving you all this information and it's your informed choice, but let's really look at this and have a conversation about this. But I think you're right. Sometimes people don't want to have these real conversations because they're worried about hurting someone's feelings or not looking like they're hopeful or have someone's back or an encourager. And I think you're right that's not right either.
It's one thing to be an encourager, and that's fine. If somebody chooses to know that something is going to be hard, how many people move out to California to become actors and end up living in their cars, but they know that this is the risk of becoming an actor, that they're going to pay their dues. Mm-hmm. And if that is where we're at, then let the person know that and make that choice. In a person that may be a little bit more cognitively not capable of fully understanding what that decision is, then you need to bring in other members of the family to talk about that, And so, but one of the things when I'm doing an evaluation, whether it's a vocational evaluation or a transition evaluation, I'm really looking at the labor market. I am an expert where disability and employment meet. And so I am going to look not only at your abilities, I'm not only going to look at your interests, I'm not only going to look at your personality, I'm going to look at the labor market and say, are there enough jobs in the labor market to support, this position? Mm-hmm. Because if there's not, and you need a lot of accommodations or you need, more than just a couple, it's going to be challenging. And so we have to understand that, we're also looking at number of employers. Yeah. And we're looking at what is the general tolerance for certain, behaviors or disabilities. And so I just evaluated an individual, very bright, has a bachelor's degree, master's certified mechanic, but he has a processing speed disorder, and it's or his processing speed is severely affected by his other disorders. And so, I leave that to you, Dr. Gwen. You can tell me what the issues are, but it's like the reality is at the very end of the day, the processing speed is slow. Yep. And so he tried to go in and become a mechanic. And the problem is while he was able to finish all the training, he couldn't keep up with the pace of the job. And so but nobody told him that. So he wasted 4 years getting a degree. He wasted another 2 years becoming a mechanic. And then he came to me after all of this. And so I can tell you, like, I have been there with people. I've held their hands while they've gotten engineering jobs. I've held their hands while they've gotten, I've worked with lawyers, doctors, people working at Walmart. I mean, I've you name the job, I've probably in some way, shape, or form helped somebody get that type of job. And I can work with people to say, hey, here's some of the things you should be looking at. And if you're not capable of moving at this pace, then we'll have to consider something else. I mean, I just, this young man, I was like, well, you're bright and you have a degree. Maybe you should consider owning your own business, and then you can move at your own pace. But if you're going to go work at any type of car shop, they're going to expect you to move fast, very fast. And there is no accommodation for pace in most of those jobs.
Well, and that, I think pace and load are two of the greatest factors when it comes to jobs that it's like a client, mine could potentially do, potentially. Sure. But under the conditions of the job, the way that job rolls, it's not going to make a difference if you have the one-on-one coach for 3 months. Like, that's not going to make the difference, right? And, I think that where my mind goes automatically as a psychologist is the emotional labor that takes. So, there is a fallout from that. And some of my clients, when they have this processing speed delay or deficit, that's very very disparate actually from what they can do when that processing speed issue is removed, right? Whether they can be given all the time in the world to do something. Right. When they come out into the world, they always feel, and my clients always use this word, pressure. Pressure. And then it really stresses them out. And then they really become dysregulated emotionally and behaviorally. And that's not good for them. Personally, it's not good for their job. It's not good for their home life, And so this is a really good point of, and that's exactly kind of going back to the transition assessments that are the ones that we're traditionally seeing in the ITP process. Cognitive profiles aren't even taken into account in those. And that I started to say, well, if they don't have a psychoed, I'll do one. Because I have to at least know, their cognitive profile, the way their memory works. How about their fine motor or gross motor performance, as well as their basic academic functioning? I mean, if, you want to go to college, but you read at a second grade level, like, that's not going to work for you. No amount of, we can't even modify a college curriculum, so, but it's having those real conversations, but those are oftentimes neglected.
Well, and it's neglected, and I don't always think I don't think schools are malicious. I've worked
not at all.
So many good districts and teachers and special ed teachers, just, sometimes it's unknown. Like, they don't know if you haven't had, I mean, I have 3 years of post-secondary education, specifically on transition and vocational rehabilitation. I have a decade of training, continuing ed training and experience doing this work. It can't be copied, and you're the same way. You have years and years of education and experience. You can't take a weekend seminar and become one of us. You can't. And as much as it takes years to get the expertise that I have. And I wish there was more emphasis on doing training and getting teachers to the place and getting educators to the place where they could get and do these evaluations independently and do them well every single time. And then I get brought in only for the occasional really difficult multiple disability student where we're having some difficulties of figuring out what's plausible. But by and large, what I'm seeing is that the just what you're saying is the goals are very general. They're not specific. They're not measurable. Or if they are, they're just very rudimentary. And then a student is either graduates to a sink or swim type situation where they didn't really have a great plan, and they had no way of executing that plan. And so then what happens? What happens is what I see again, hundreds of times. People sit on their couches, and then at 23, 24, they find their way to me or somebody like me. And then regardless of their potential, they could have been, a person that went to college, or they could have been a person that was successful in a full-time job. I'm starting over again. They've regressed, or they've lost some compensatory strategies. And so now we're getting them a job, a very entry basic level job, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. There's dignity and honor and all that in doing work of any type. But at the same time, they're not reaching what they could have potentially, reached.
Yeah. I mean, they're underpotentialed.
Yes.
For sure. And I mean, even I've had Jessica Lee on the program, and she's director over at the Spectrum Works, where they're helping to place. They're working with companies to help them with an inclusive model
Sure.
at the company level, and
Yes.
then matching them to talent, right?
Right.
And but we talked about how this kind of disparate percentage of adults who have degrees and are underpotentialed in work.
Yes.
They've got master's degrees, sometimes doctorate degrees, and they're not working at those levels, right? Or that the unemployment rate, and I don't have to tell you that, is.
The unemployment rate for people with disabilities is always higher than people without disabilities, and underemployment, as you said, is probably the most significant issue.
Yeah.
Is where you have very, very smart, capable people underemployed, working in jobs where you wouldn't need a 4-year degree or master degree. They're working, far below what they could be, and their earnings are less,
Yes.
And so we're not only setting up, without addressing these issues, you're not only setting up a person to not immediately fail, as soon as they graduate, but then a lifetime of possibly poverty, a lifetime of underemployment,
Yeah.
or living below the means of where their parents, what they were accustomed to growing up. And that is that is challenging. That's very challenging to put a person in that position, regardless of disability or not. Once you make somebody dependent on a system, or dependent on other people to help them because they're not earning enough to support themselves, you create a whole dynamic in their life that is very sad. It's very hard to break again once it starts as well. So it's not just about transition. It's not just about that moment that they leave high school, but you're looking, and again, I've worked with people of all ages. I've seen them from 14 years old. I've seen them all the way up to about into their 80s. And so I've seen where disability goes and where it'll lead people. And a vast majority of the people that we work with in placement activities, regardless of their education levels, are living at the poverty level. And I'm going to say that again, because I don't think people always understand that. Regardless of their educational attainment, they're living at the poverty level or very close to it. So maybe a couple thousand above. And then they're making a decision. Do I stay a couple of $1,000s above the poverty level, or do I reduce my work so I can collect government benefits? Yep. And now we're in a situation where this person is in the cycle of poverty, and it's almost impossible to break out of. It's not impossible, people do, but it is very, very challenging once you're there and you're getting food stamps and government support or SSI. It becomes very challenging once you start down that road to get off that road.
Yes. And I know I keep going back to this. I can't even help myself. There's a psychological impact to this.
It is.
And that's part, and when you say dynamic, I think that's part of it, right? How do I feel about myself? What were the dreams that I had? Where did I see myself? So many of my clients know that they're capable of more.
Yeah.
And that's the frustrating part, is that they're not kind of executing the things that they see themselves wanting or knowing they can do. Let alone, I think the other piece from a transition perspective is, helping the system, the family system, really understand from a more objective perspective where their teen or young adult is, so that you can back into the supports or identify an actionable plan where it helps empower the student with skills, and that helps the parent let go.
Sure.
But, yeah.
Yeah, but on the flip side too, I've seen the other, the other end of the spectrum. There's nobody right. It's very few people right in the exact place where they should be.
Yeah.
I've seen people like, oh, my child has a disability, and all of a sudden that excludes them from work or being successful or living independently. I've seen that a number of times as well. So you have this other end of the spectrum of where a person, has very parental expectations are very low, even though the child is capable. And it's just like they may need a little bit of more, a little bit more work. They may need a little bit more effort on their part. They may need to, start off someplace different than their peers. But with intervention, with training, with some additional education, they could work full time. They could work and support themselves. They don't need to be on government services. And there's not, if people end up on that, that's another broadcast, right?
Yeah, it's the episode number 2 with us. It's another conversation.
But we should be pushing, pushing students, pushing not to beyond to the stratosphere, but pushing them in what's a reasonable, realistic goal, right? We talk sometimes about SMART goal setting, or we talk about different types of goal setting, but part of what we do when we're setting realistic goals is setting realistic, achievable goals. Maybe with a little bit of stretch. I'm okay with a little bit of stretch. I think we all need to stretch. I set goals for myself that I'm like, I want to achieve, since the pandemic, I want to lose 30 pounds before the end of the year, so I stretch myself a little bit too. And that is part of being an adult is having that little bit of stretch, but not to the point where we're breaking a person, or not to the point where we're going the other way and we're not giving the person some type of thing to reach for in their life.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that just right threshold is and it goes back to having a very clear idea of who this person is.
Sure.
Being really honest with that piece, and really being okay with wherever they are. Meet them wherever, it's fine. It doesn't, for me, it doesn't matter what it's called. I don't really care. I just want to be honest with where this person is so that we have a really clear way to determine a path forward that is reasonable, makes sense. Some words that I use in my practice a lot of times is, I want it to be possible for you, not just simple.
Sure.
Simple and easy, those words, get thrown around. And then some of my families will be like, I know this sounds really simple. I know this is really, I'm like, no, but is it possible?
Right.
Is it possible for you? Is it possible for your family? That's what we really need to focus on. We don't need to have any value judgments about it. But I just kind of love the way that a really nice evaluation serves as that blueprint to make all of these decisions.
And the thing is, I guess going back to the original questions that you asked me, what is a transition evaluation? So by the time a person gets to me or to somebody like you, and I know you've seen this, they've been evaluated to death. They've been evaluated by, probably 30 different professionals over the last, 15 to years, and they come to me and it's like, oh, what are you going to do? Oh, another assessment. And I'm like, look, okay, so I get it. So the way I explain what I do in a very simplistic term is like, look, everybody's looking at the apple slices, and I'm trying to look at the apple, right? You have had your speech language evaluation. You have had, your neuropsych. You have had, a behavioral, an FBA. You've had all these different evaluations. But I'm the person that's going to put all those pieces together and say, this is what this looks like in the world. And so I'm going to synthesize information maybe from, and I've had evaluations from 10 different professionals on one student, and I'm putting all the pieces together and say, this is what it's going to look like. And here is where we're at. And when you're only looking at, one specific subset of behavior or only one specific, skill set, you can miss out. You see the tree, but you miss the whole forest. And so I think as transition experts, we're looking at the forest. We're looking at the whole person and their life, just like you said, live, learn, and work, right? So we're looking at where they're going to be. And it's not just, now those skill sets are important. I often refer out to different types of evaluations because I don't have enough information, or it's missing. It's a glaring deficit that needs to be evaluated. So especially behaviors or something like that. So I'll send people out for a behavioral evaluation, but at the end of the day, whether I have that evaluation or not, this is where we're at, right? So it needs to be evaluated further, but this is where we're at, and we need to say, okay, it's like that sign on the maps with the big X.
You are here.
You are here. You are here. Now we want to go there. Let's draw that little dotted line and how to get there. And so we do that. I do that every single day with evaluations. And sometimes it's very simple, or, what's possible. And sometimes it's a much more complex route. And so, it's a joy. I love doing this type of work.
Me too. It's so fun. It's so fun. I'm going to make you a shirt, Bruce. I'm going to make you a shirt that says apple, not apple slices.
Yes.
I'm about the apple, not the apple slices. I'm going to make you a shirt.
I think on our website, we have experts where disability and employment meet. I'm going to change it to experts in apples and apple slices.
Apples, not apple slices. It's really simple. I love that. It's almost like the visionary, and that's what's so fun. It's this kind of like overall mission and vision for this person where I get really excited when I'm like, ooh, imagine this potential.
Right.
And I think that's what I love the most, especially the more complex my client presents, the more I think we have to be creative and think outside of the box. And we really have to then rely on our expertise and our experiences and our education for that, and collaboration with other people and other professionals. I do this all the time, as you know. I do this all the time because I definitely don't have all the answers. And I really do believe that the professionals and the districts that we work with are very well intentioned. There's very good intentions. And so it's just really a matter of how do we move it from intention to action, and
again, often I get called into a district. It is not always parents that are calling me in. It's not always an attorney that's calling me in. So a lot of times the districts are calling me in because when you're dealing with a unique case that has of a student that there are multiple disabilities and going to be multiple barriers to employment, if you've never placed a person similar to that, or if you don't have some kind of framework to work with, it's challenging. And you don't, and an educator, good and well-intentioned or not, they may not know, like, okay, well, this is where we're going.
Yeah.
And so if they don't know, it becomes the blind leading the blind. And so it's in those kinds of situations, I become a person that can give guidance and say, here's some of the things that are possible or could occur, and we should go and look at these areas. And so many times it's not going to be more classroom training. I mean, I know classroom training is sometimes very important, but it's sometimes more than that. And so you have to be able to give unique individual solutions to very complex problems, not just a blanket, here's the solution for everyone,
Yes. Yeah. The solution does need to meet the student.
Right.
For sure. Yeah. Oh yeah. We could have many episodes together, Bruce. I think that could be really possible. So Bruce, when do you see people coming to you? The way I like to look at this is when people feel a pressure point or a pain point and they're like, I got to find someone to help me with this.
Sure.
When do you, what are those triggers that usually bring people to you? I think you had said something earlier. Sometimes it's that 20-year-old that's like, didn't really know what to do after high school, sitting on the couch, nowhere to go, right? That might be the pressure point of a parent. I don't know that now wants your help, but
it really depends on the parent. There's some parents that once their child is diagnosed, even if it's at a very young age, they're already looking down the pike of adult life. And that's a rare parent, but I have run into parents that have 3 or 4-year-olds and contact me for consultation. What do I need to be looking out for now? That's the best type of parent, because I can tell them, in Texas, this is not the case in California. In California, Medicaid waivers are much better or are better funded. In Texas, you're looking at 10 to 15 years before you can get Medicaid services as an adult. So if you don't get on those lists when you're that 5, 6 years old, you're not going to get services when you turn 18. So it's not the case. I mean, I evaluate people in Nevada, California, Pennsylvania. Their Medicaid, you may wait a few months, but you're going to get services pretty much right away. But in Texas, not the case. And so when a parent calls me when their child is young, I'm starting to give them some things to work on with their child to get them ready for their adult life. Whether a lot of times it's going to be simple things like time on task. Which is often ignored, like prompting and go back to the task, That's there's a Department of Labor study and a Census Bureau study on time studies for employers, and basically what is tolerated in competitive integrated employment. And it's about 10%. So if you're off task more than 10% of the workday, you are likely going to face challenges in maintaining competitive employment. In some cases, it can be just slightly higher. If you have a much more independent job, you may be able to be off a little bit more than that, but generally about 10% of the workday. And so if you're off tasks, and so what that means is 6 minutes per hour. If you're off task more than 6 minutes per hour, you're going to face some challenges in work, and those challenges you may be able to get some special accommodations, you may be able to, but you may not be able to. And so in Social Security work, so if we're just looking at a medical model, you're not employable. You're not employable if you're off task that much of the day without some type of special, requiring some type of special prompting, then you're going to stay home because you're not going to go to work. There's not going to be an employer that's going to tolerate that. And so, these are things that can be worked at with younger children. Delayed gratification is another big one I bring up to parents of younger children because in the world of work, and I've been with people that on job sites where they're like, "Where's my money?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, they finished their first workday and they're like, "I want to get paid." And I actually had one person, we don't restrain adults, at the point that I didn't restrain him, but I put myself between him and the manager's office because he was going to go in and bang his fists on the desk and demand to get paid for the work that he did. So work is not an instant gratification.
Yeah.
I go to work today, I go to work tomorrow, I may work for 2 weeks and not get a paycheck. And so unless somebody can understand that concept, it becomes a challenge in employment because you're in the same way gratification comes at the end of the road. Same thing with punishment, right? So if you have a bad day today, you may get away with it. Tomorrow, you may get away with it, but at some point down the road, it's going to happen and it's going to come to a head. So we need to think about that, either delayed gratification or keeping behaviors on task, So that's one trigger point. The second trigger point, you can tell me if I'm talking too long.
Please. Go, Bruce.
You're talking about a topic that I love. And
go, preach, go. Yeah.
So the second time that parents will start reaching out to me is just when their child is exiting middle school and entering high school. Because, the law requires, now let's go to the law. Transition planning starts at 14 or should start at 14, and a plan should be in place. So we don't start planning at 16, but the plan should be in place at 16. And so parents who are savvy will start saying, okay, well, I haven't had any transition. We haven't talked about it. My child is 14 and I want to start talking about it at a greater level. And so they'll come to me and we'll start actually doing evaluations. And so a transition evaluation doesn't have to be a one-time event.
Yep.
A vocational evaluation doesn't have to be a one-time event. In fact, it's almost a disservice because it's just a snapshot of where that student is at that point in time. When we're looking at a student that can make progress, I've evaluated students in 9th and 10th grade, and by the time they're finishing their, if they've been a little bit, if they needed a little bit of additional education and stayed in their school past the age of 18 and are in an 18 plus type program. So now we have a student that may be like 21 and I'm called back in and I'll be like, wow, this is a different student. Yeah. I mean, I had a student I had a student in 10th grade that I was like, this young person is going to have significant challenges, had behavioral issues and communication issues and all types of issues. And I gave the family and the people involved a really good assessment of where he was at this point in time.
Yeah.
But they didn't give up hope, and they worked on a lot of skill sets, night and day. Between 10th grade and in his 20s, night and day. It was a totally different student. I wouldn't have guessed it was the same person, but I knew his history because I had worked with him. And he was cracking jokes, socially appropriate jokes. He was polite. He was a hard worker. He was on task, and they took my recommendations to heart and continued to work on them year after year until he was about to age out of school. And they're like, well, what can happen now? And I'm like, where do you want him to work? I'll get him a job. It's like,
that's amazing.
When they get somebody that's polite and has good social skills and can stay on task, what kind of employer do you want?
That's awesome. But look at you just boiled it down to the biggest levers.
Right.
Time on task.
Yeah.
Polite. Right. I mean, respectful. I think. What else did you say, Bruce? There's one more.
Time on task, polite, and a hard worker. I may have said something different, but
no, but I think we'll rewind. We'll rewind and catch it. But that's it, right? And again, like those might sound very simple, but you and I both know how much goes into those three things. So that's amazing. I have often. Because I've been frustrated with all the inventories because I want other information. I want like self-management. I want self-knowledge. I want advocacy. I want all of these things. I want like a good critical thinking for like digital technology skills, being able to say no to yourself. So I've been creating my own inventory because I'm tired of using 6 different ones. And
you should license it.
I know. Well, maybe after I'll talk to you about it. But my thing is that it's done on the 15th birthday,
right?
And every year on the birthday thereafter.
Okay.
Until because then at least it's like, and they're just skills. They're just skills that I see to be necessary. Things like, I'm laughing. People want their kids to interface with money, and I'm like, but can they recognize numbers? Or you want them to be safe at home. Can they unlock and lock a door?
Right.
It's like really getting to these micro things, but I'm finding all these holes because I'm working so closely with families that these are the questions that I have because they imagine their adult child living somewhere. And then it automatically for me, like if I simulate this kid in that experience, oh my God. Okay, wait, but can they call for help? Do they know,
Well, one of the big issues and this is the reason you need somebody with our level of expertise, and I speak, of you and myself, is that like the world is changing a lot faster than psychometric testing is changing. It is, I can't tell you the number of school systems I've walked into and I'm like, okay, you're working on dollars and cents and you're working with like real cash. I haven't carried real cash in only when I go on vacation. If I'm around like my neighborhood and I'm in I haven't carried cash in probably like 5 years.
Yeah.
We are essentially in a cashless society. So
especially now.
Yes, especially now. And so, learning how to use a debit card, learning the very basic concepts. Do I have enough?
Yep.
Do I have enough? And there's such great tools that parents can have where you can train a student. Like I carry, so let me see if I can pull it out. Like I carry like a credit card that has an app, and it I can see exactly how much money is in my account. So when I go to the store, I don't have to like balance a checkbook.
Yeah.
It's a debit card specifically just for my food purchases or whim purchases, and I don't have to think about how much is in there. I can look on my phone. Oh, I have this much in there.
Yep.
Now I know, do I have enough? And
you need greater than less than knowledge.
Yeah,
oh,
exactly.
That's it. And that's what that's what people aren't really figuring out right now. Because I completely agree with him. Like, cash, why are we counting cash? They can only count by dollar bills. And now you're in the line at Trader Joe's. That thing is $49 and you're counting one by one. And then they lose their spot because they're distracted by some. And we still have to start again. Bruce, I'm like, this is not a viable nor sustainable action in this place.
Right.
The line is now growing. No, we whether we secured the budget because we knew exactly how much everything was and we created the list based on that. And then that's all. They just have to focus on the list and give them a car, like whatever the workaround is for that. But yeah, I know. You and I could do like another episode just on cash and mobility. Those are all day long. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are like, again, transition is one of those areas where you can go down rabbit hole after rabbit hole after rabbit hole because there are just so many areas to cover. When I'm evaluating a student, it is not the end game. It is the beginning. I tell students when I'm evaluating them, this is not the end. This is the beginning of a process of exploration.
Yes.
Because we need to like look at these, and I'm going to point out some of the glaring, like here are the big, like, flashing neon signs that are saying we need to look out for this. Yeah. But in every area, there's other subset of skills that may be missing. We're not even going to get to them because a lot of times I'm just dealing with the very basic skills. People can't wash themselves yet are doing like, calculus and they can't shower by themselves without like significant prompting, or they can't brush their own teeth, but yes, they're doing calculus. And I'm trying to reconcile this difference for families and saying, look, great, calculus, thumbs up. You're smarter than me. You really are. I can't do calculus.
Yeah, me neither.
I can't. I always tell families, I would have been a medical doctor if I could do math. Yeah. And once science became math, I was like, I checked out. I couldn't do it. And so, we as transition experts, as people that have been down this road with countless other students, we're looking for these big flashing neon signs. And as you work with a student, and this, if you're doing it in private practice or you're doing it in a school, you're going to start identifying some other deficits, once you start putting it under a microscope. And so generally, I evaluate people one time. I'm a catch and release type person. I'll evaluate you, give you my opinion, and then send you back to your school or send you back to other adult supports. Yeah. Now, I do have staff members that do work on those types of things. We work with students or adults, not just students, but we work with people to get jobs. We support them now in college. We support them in independent living. We are supporting them in all the three areas. Yes. We are supporting them in those three areas, as I love the work that we do. But I don't have time to do that, but we certainly can do it.
Yeah. And, go back to your services, Bruce, because your college program that you were talking about. Say more about that, because that's a newer addition to your suite.
If you really want to know more, we do a lot of services, and you really should hear Dr. James Williamson and Dr. Deanne Lechtenberger. You should hear what they have to say, so the way it started is it's always been our goal as a company to enrich people and to help them succeed in their adult life. And one way to do that is through education. Education is a powerful tool. There's a lot of research that shows that people that are educated have a higher, earnings over their lifetime than people that don't. And so, but here's some of the issues. When you go to college, you are now losing all of the supports that you may have had under an IEP. You are now expected for the first time in your life to operate at this really high level of executive functioning and independence and social, have all these additional social skills that you may not have had before, self-advocacy. And what happens very often, and again, I've seen this hundreds of times, not just a couple of dozen, hundreds of times, where students are graduated into college, and then that may have been an appropriate goal, but because of either lack of support or lack of ability, they fail. And then they end up right where a good majority of these students end up is on their parents' couch, sitting and waiting for somebody to come and rescue them from that place. And so one of the goals that we had as a company was to support people in their education. And so Dr. Deanne Lechtenberger was at Texas Tech. She started their CASE program, which is a great program, one of the best in the whole country. We are very fortunate it is in Texas. But it was a program that was designed to help people with autism or other learning differences obtain their 4-year degree at Texas Tech. The limitation on that program, while a very good program, is that you had to be in Lubbock, Texas, if you wanted to participate in it. So when she retired, we had a really good working relationship with her. We decided that, or she approached us, and we were all for it, about starting a program to help students wherever college or certification or associate's degree that they were going to achieve, that we would be there to support them through their program and provide the same type of supports that she was able to provide students at Texas Tech. And so we have used that model. She created the model. We're using that model. And we're supporting students. We're going to support them wherever they are. And so it's a great program. I'm super excited about that. I believe it or not, a decade ago, I didn't have my own office. I used to meet people at the grocery store, because the grocery store in Texas by my house had a little cafe in the front.
Yeah.
So I finally realized about maybe 9 years ago, I needed my own office because the tables, we didn't have enough tables. And I would always fear that somebody else would come there early in the morning and then there wouldn't be enough tables for us. So I used to have this joke, meet me in aisle 13 where the chips are. But, from that to launching these programs to help college students anywhere in the country obtain their, degree or get through their certification program with the support that they need to be successful. And that is just one of the programs that we've just recently launched. And so we're excited about that. That is, again, a whole meeting just to talk about that program. Yeah. And it is about how that will look and what it looks like and why and the data behind it. So it's not just feel good. We're really a data-driven company. We love data. We collect lots of data on the work that we're doing. That's how I know at any given time that our placement rate for people in employment services is in the high 90 percentile. So if we take you, evaluate you, and say you can work, we're placing you at the 90th percentile or higher, which is almost unheard of in this industry. I can tell you when we're doing pre-employment transition services or helping people with disabilities learn some of those soft skills, or do some career exploration, that, our students are not only enjoying our programming, but coming out with skill sets. We've had people in the middle of our programs get jobs and come back and report how excited and proud they are of themselves that they were able to do this by themselves. Just in a little side note, sometimes they feel like we've given them the permission they needed to be an adult. Right? We're telling them you now have the ability, go use it and find yourself a job. And in some cases they do. And they come back and we had a young woman that was homeless, had a disability. She was homeless. And she came back like the third day into our program saying she got herself an interview. And then she contacted us after our program was over to say she got herself a full-time job. And so it was just an exciting, we do exciting work. I'm just so proud of my team. I'm just the evaluative side. But we do other services, across the board, although, again, serving students, but also adults, all the way up into their 80s.
That's amazing. And the college support, is that virtually, Bruce? You can support people, is that what's happening with that program?
Yeah, so it's in person in certain schools. So we have partnerships. We are going to have in-person partnerships. We are being contracted in the state of Nevada. So we will have in-person services in multiple campuses in Nevada. We are in the process of being contracted with state VR in the state of Texas. Mm-hmm. And so, if people live in the towns that we operate in, or if we have a partner campus, we will be on their campus providing in-person supports. However, it is also offered virtually. We actually have some clients right now in California, and the reimbursement rate is so low compared to some of the other programs out there. Again, just my own personal bias. I really feel strongly that when you put the word disability in front of something, should not mean cheap and garbage, because it sometimes the services are so below par and you're like, why is this the case? Because a person has a disability. Or it shouldn't be so expensive that the average family, it's outside of the average family's reach. And I've seen that. That's one of my big I guess, my own pet peeve. Like, I think like college, support programs that support students with disabilities in college, sometimes they're, not including the cost of the college or into the dorms. I mean, they could be like $50,000, and that's a lot of money. I don't know, even very well-off families, $50,000 a year plus the cost of college, plus the cost of dorms. Looking at maybe 100. I have somebody that specializes in post-secondary placements, and she has spreadsheets and charts, and she's saying some of the programs are $110,000, $115,000 a year, and she's like, and that's just where it starts. It's like, there's other things that go on top of that, medical insurance, that are not including in that rate. And, again, there may be some very affluent families, and, $110,000 a year is like no big deal. But for most families, that is a huge amount of money, even if you are affluent. And so we are creating quality programs, at a reasonable rate that can be funded through a variety of sources. Like when we started our independent living program, Bloom Village, we just launched that again this year. It's like we are one thing right after another, but we wanted to give one issue that has come up over a period of time has been there are students that are graduating that have the ability to live by themselves, but, and this is the but, they need somebody to provide some natural support in their environment. They don't need to be bathed. They can do their own ADLs. They are high functioning. They just need somebody to make sure everything's okay. So we were able to launch that, with a rate that's consistent with other people without disabilities obtaining, the same type of living situation. And so, we as a company are passionate about what we do, and passionate about, giving to the community, not through just, charity, but through good services. We provide services that at a rate that is consistent with what most people can afford. So.
Yeah, that's amazing, Bruce. That's amazing. Wow, you've had a lot of stuff happen. I mean, since the last time I've spoken to you, well, that's gonna have to be another episode. We'll sit down and break those apart. I love that. Hey, Bruce, I always end my interviews this way, and I know you've hit some on these things, but I'm curious if you could only empower one skill, and you could only choose one. What would it be and why?
It's so hard. It's so hard. I have like so many. Frankly, it would be the soft skills, and I know that encompasses a lot. And so I can do, or a person with a good strategies, good social strategies, and a good personality, and is able to interact well with people in a socially appropriate way. They can find a lot of grace in employment. When you have an individual that is, maybe grates a little bit, or has some quirks that are a little bit off the norm. I'm excited. I'll stop just for a second to say I'm really excited. You talked about that program that is working with companies to become inclusive.
Yeah.
That is a huge issue. Companies want to hire people with disabilities, but they don't want to be inclusive. They want those people with disabilities to fit the norm of their company culture.
Yep.
And that's a big issue. And I've tried to address it with companies. We were actually contracted with a very, very large tech company, a very large tech company, and they wanted us to coach people with autism and help them fit into their culture. And what we ended up telling them is, I can't take any more of your clients because the issue is not the person, the issue is the culture. And you have to address the culture, but That being said, we still live in the world that we live in. And so if I was looking at any one skill set, I would by and large, endorse social skills training and developing good social skills. Because if I can get an individual, and again, I've placed a ton of individuals in employment, variety of jobs, doctors, pharmacists, people with high levels of education, and good social skills, even in those higher level positions, can get you a lot of accommodations. A lot of accommodations. And where, somebody who's a little bit more gruff, maybe grates a little bit more, it's just the way the law falls. So ADA, ADAA, we used to call it in graduate school, the law with no teeth. So while companies are required to make reasonable accommodations and make reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities, the reality is if they don't, or if they are the determiner of what's reasonable in many cases.
Yeah.
And so then the issue becomes, it's like, what do you do? Even let's say if there's a blatant violation of ADA. Okay, do you have thousands and thousands of dollars to hire lawyers to sue them? Because that's really what it's going to take to make that happen. And so while most companies, so backtrack on just that a little bit, well, most companies will make those accommodations when you come across real well and have good soft skills. It's a lot easier to get that, that's just from personal experience and placing people in jobs. So,
well, yeah. And, in really for Spectrum Works, their work with companies has been difficult because it's really looking at the culture.
Sure.
And looking at like how even the initial interview process is discriminatory. So really looking at all those pieces on top of like talent training, which is usually in the soft skills arena and the self-knowledge arena, but man, I mean, they're working hard on some of these issues that I think are really big, but they see so much of traditional employment to be very discriminatory.
Well, you think about and I was an HR generalist, so I can speak directly to this. I mean, an employer will look at your resume, 30 seconds, good minute, before moving on to the next one. Yeah. And then many times a hiring decision is made within the first few minutes of an interview. So you could have a person in your office and immediately you've already determined in your mind, you're not going to hire this person. And unless something happens magically in the time you decide that to the end of the interview, that's it. And so, hiring processes, and this is, again, probably another conversation, but I love, if there are any business owners out there, consider changing your hiring practice to a show me type interview rather than a sit down interview.
Tell me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you can see people work for a little bit and see what they can do, you'll be surprised. A lot of times, people with disabilities, their turnover is so much less. They don't leave employers as readily as other individuals without disabilities. So that's just statistics.
Yep.
And so you save yourself a lot of money. You save yourself a lot of money when you're not constantly turning people over. Turnover.
Most of the time, reliable.
Takes
pride in their work. I mean, they don't want to miss work. I mean, they're the most amazing employees when they find that space, that when they find that job. I mean, I've got, I mean, that would be episode 5 maybe now. I think we're on episode 5.
We're up to episode 5 yet, and not including an episode with James and Deanne. So.
Well, yeah, you and I can schedule all those. But so Bruce, where can people find you? I'll put it in the description below, but maybe you can just verbally tell people where they can find you and learn more about you and your company.
Sure. So they can go to our website, Bloom Consulting Co. So bloomconsultingco.com. And so you'll see all of our services there. We talk about vocational evaluations. We talk about training for individuals that are teenagers or in transition, our On the Right Track program. We talk about our Campus Connections program. references to Bloom Village, which is our independent living program, and on and on and on. We have lots of employment services and all the different types of services we offer, and we serve across the country. At this point, one of the advantages of the pandemic is that people are now more open to virtual services. So we serve people and students, mostly students, across the country. We probably should put up a big map and start putting pins where people are coming from.
You are here. See, we go back to you are here. Yeah.
So people are coming to us from all over the country, and I've evaluated people all over the country. And so people can find us on our website and look and see the great things that we're doing. Tune into our Facebook group, or just our Facebook channel, and Instagram, Twitter. I think we're on LinkedIn. My staff does more social media marketing, but we always announce what we're doing on Facebook. So if you and follow us on Facebook, you'll see what we're doing, what crazy things the Bloom Consulting Group is doing.
I love it. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you for your time and sharing your talents with us today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate this. I just, I really very happy and glad to have a life where I get to serve families and serve, people with disabilities and help them have a better life, a more fulfilling life, and so the opportunity to talk about that, and probably why I'm so long-winded, is I enjoy what I do. So
it's obvious. So thank you. Hey, thanks for watching. If you're interested in finding out more about Bruce and his company, Bloom Consulting, which is singly focused on the employment of neurodivergent and disabled individuals, the information is in the description below. I've also provided a link to my website where I provide additional insights and impressions of this interview. If you got any value from this interview, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Doing so helps to get this information to others just like you. And if there's a topic or a program that you want to know more about, leave it in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.